Aslan was reborn again, 50 years ago when his family drove him to the border to farm. He once rose here and developed the most impoverished Merlot region of the kingdom into the wealthiest commercial city on the continent. This life is coming back. He no longer wants to be a lord or a powerful minister, he wants to be an emperor. Aslan's famous quote. If you don't want to be the emperor's lord, you are not a good lord. Keywords of the novel. No pop-ups for lords who want to be emperors. Download the complete TXT collection for lords who want to be emperors, and read the latest chapters for lords who want to be emperors. Chapter 1. Rebirth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Rebirth. After drinking the poisoned wine bestowed by His Majesty the Emperor, Aslan fell to the ground in a daze, reminiscing about his life. He walked step by step from the border town to the end, with power shifting to the state and even suffocating the emperor at one point. His life as Aslan Sera was truly remarkable. As memories passed by bit, Aslan only felt a pain in his chest, his eyes closed, and the blood from the corners of his mouth kept overflowing. Outside the remote yard where Aslan Saleh, the legendary prime minister, was confined, a strong wind suddenly blew and rainstorm poured down, which made the guards tremble. At the moment of lightning and thunder, the era belonging to Aslan Sera came to an end. When Aslan opened his eyes again, next to him was a hard linen bag and a bumpy sky. Why is it a bumpy sky? Aslan, who opened his eyes, was lying on an old carriage, with wooden wheels walking on sandy and rocky ground. The uneven terrain often made the old carriage bounce up and down. Aslan lay on the sandbag, staring blankly at the sky, and finally instinctively pinched his face. Ouch, it hurts. Aslan sat up suddenly, feeling a strong stabbing pain from the wound on his body, making him more aware that he was still alive. The intense pain did not make him show a painful expression, but rather a slightly raised corner of his mouth, revealing a strange smile. I was actually reborn. In the 21st century, an ordinary worker living a plain and indifferent life, Aslan, born in the 1990s, worked overtime continuously for his beloved woman and enough dowry money for his mother-in-law. In the end, he did not bring back his beautiful woman and died suddenly. This death, perhaps out of pity, led him to travel to a different world and become a noble lord. From the end of his life, he gained power and even almost led the Cleveland Kingdom to unify the northern continent. Unfortunately, during his expedition, the ministers of the court united to create obstacles for him and secretly joined forces with other countries. Due to internal and external troubles, he was defeated by the coalition army and fled back to the kingdom. The new emperor took advantage of the decline of Aslan's defeat and reached an agreement with other ministers to control the ministers of the Aslan court in one fell swoop, sending royal guardians to pursue Aslan. In the end, Aslan, who had no escape, chose to surrender. In order to protect the future of his former followers and soldiers, he accepted the poison bestowed by the emperor. Is this giving him the opportunity to change his destiny when he is reborn again on his first journey? This time, I don't want to be a powerful minister who leans against the government. If I want to be, I will be the emperor and the maker of game rules. Aslan covered the wound on his body, and the clear pain told him that everything would start over again. The current Aslan, who had just experienced a family feud and suffered a disastrous defeat, was assigned to a border family territory as a lord, in simple terms, exiled. Before his rebirth, Aslan also took advantage of this border town and developed into a border commercial giant, becoming a pivotal aristocrat in the Cleveland Kingdom. Master Aslan, are you okay? The middle-aged man beside Aslan looked at him with nervous and worried eyes. He is Arthur, the guardian knight of Aslan, with intermediate knightly strength and also the strongest sword around Aslan. Later on, his strength gradually fell behind Aslan's progress, but he remained loyal to guarding Aslan's side. Until Aslan was executed, he also committed suicide with his sword. Ah, Arthur. Aslan looked at the old man in front of him who had been following him for decades, and couldn't help but feel a sigh in his heart. I am subordinate. It's okay, I just called you. I'll be relying on you for a long time in the future. Trouble. Aslan forced a smile and fell asleep. When he woke up again, he had already arrived at the border town of Merlot. A small town with a population of less than 500, it benefits from the Great Rift Canyon at the border between the Kingdom of Cleveland and the East Asian subcontinent, which is connected to the east. The reason why Aslan was able to open up trade routes between the two continents was because it depleted the resources of the entire territory and established the Split Peak Bridge, which opened up trade channels between the two continents. At this moment, this place can only be described as desolate. The land is barren, with granite of all sizes visible, making the already barren land even more unsuitable for cultivation. Looking at the entire dilapidated and backward town, accompanied by Aslan's followers who were exiled here, one by one showed signs of despair. Only Aslan didn't care, instead he looked at everything in front of him with full confidence. Before his rebirth, he was able to manage this border small town to become the largest trading city in the kingdom. Today, he can still do it, and even do it even better. Moreover, this time he not only wants to become the lord of the trading city, but also a great lord with heavy troops. Let's go back to the lord's mansion first, Aslan said calmly, covering his wound. There was a hint of calmness and composure in the tone, which quickly calmed down the originally anxious attendants, organized the convoy, and began to enter the town. Aslan did not bring many followers, 3 old carriages, and 3 elderly drivers. Arthur and the escort team leading junior knights, with less than 15 members. In addition, there are 3 servants who have been taking care of his daily life for many years. As direct descendants of the Sarah family, such a team is a bit shabby. Who calls Aslan the loser? The convoy slowly drove into the small town of Merlot, and no one came out to greet him. Instead, he was confined to doors and windows, and from time to time, a pair of vigilant eyes could be seen staring at him from behind. There has always been no lord in the town of Merlot, and the entire town is governed by the mayor and warden elected by them, with the will of the residents being the mainstay. Simply put, they are the masters of their own affairs. Now that the heavenly lord has descended, who can guarantee that this lord will not impose exorbitant taxes or engage in outrageous behavior? The Kingdom of Cleveland has been established for more than 500 years and has also experienced multiple rebellions, but they were ultimately suppressed by powerful military force. The current Cleveland Kingdom has also decayed to the core, with aristocrats being extremely extravagant. For most commoners, nobility is not a good thing. Aslan quickly turned his gaze to the 2-story building in town, which was the home of Claude, the most powerful swordsman in the town. When Aslan first arrived at the town of Merlot in his previous life, it took him 2 years to master it. The key reason was that Claude had been causing trouble behind the scenes, and the captain of Merlot was Claude's younger brother. The location of the Lord's mansion is very recognizable because it is the most luxurious and towering building in the town of Merlot, as well as the only 3-story building in Merlot. It is a castle with an ancient design that has been left behind from an unknown era. The originally scarred walls are now covered with moss and ivy, and there is no trace of the original war fortress, but it adds a touch of pastoral charm. During this period, many people have said that the virgin pig's feet is not worthy of the name Xiaoxiong. Lao Gu would like to share his understanding of Xiaoxiong here. Xiaoxiong is not a cruel and ruthless person, but can only be considered as an executioner and butcher. Capitalists are qualified Xiaoxiong. In daily life, they are kind and even willing to help the elderly cross the road. However, in terms of capital operation, their cruelty is beyond your understanding. You can study the history of capitalist development in Europe and America. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Start. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Start. Outside the Lord's mansion, Aslan's convoy had just stopped. Arthur looked at the empty Lord's mansion, but surprisingly, no one came to welcome the new lord. His face suddenly turned cold, and he wanted to shout angrily, but Aslan stopped him. Don't worry, the boats and carts have been tiring for so many days. Let the soldiers rest well to avoid being in a bad state during the battle. Arthur's eyes flashed with a gleam of brilliance, and the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. This failure and injury have made the young master grow a lot. Yes. Young master. Town Magistrate Eshan and Guard Captain Ron ran out of the Lord's mansion in a panic, especially Ron, who was still carrying a strong alcohol smell, indicating that he had just been drinking heavily. In his past life, Aslan had just crossed over and, with a background in a rule of law society, he was quite disgusted with violence. In the end, he only gave Ron a harsh scolding and did not punish him severely, leaving a weak and deceitful impression on the people of the town. In fact, these were all deliberately arranged by Claude to undermine Aslan's credibility. He was confident that no matter how angry Aslan was, he wouldn't dare to force their brothers too much. After all, Claude is the strongest in the town, and his brother is also the captain of the town's militia. If we push the two of them into a hurry, it's hard to guarantee that anything extreme will happen. After all, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. Over the years, the people of Merlot town have long understood that the nobles behind the Merlot area have been indifferent to this place for decades and have obviously abandoned them. Since the Serra family has exiled Aslan here, they have no intention of keeping Aslan alive. The aristocratic rule of the Cleveland Kingdom over the common people has always been extremely brutal. Once there is a public rebellion, suppressing it will only become more bloody and brutal. Famous insiders and outsiders in neighboring countries. If you want to master Merlot town as quickly as possible, these two brothers must not stay. Aslan, who had no expression on his face, passed by the mayor and the guard, causing them to be shocked. Especially Ron, who had intended to embarrass the new lord in public, did not expect Aslan to be angry, not even showing any signs of emotion, and not paying attention to them. Aslan has been in the town of Merlot for 3 days now. Apart from occupying the Lord's mansion, after driving out the original office staff, it remains as peaceful and quiet as before, as if no lords have ever entered. This made the Claude brothers feel like a punch on cotton, with no place to exert their strength. It wasn't until the big shots in the small town received an invitation that they all began to ponder. The Lord's mansion is very rudimentary. As it is a defensive fortress, many facilities are very rudimentary. In order to facilitate banquets, Aslan had the excess furniture in the hall removed, leaving only the dining table for guests. Due to local limitations, Aslan is powerless to set up a banquet at the entrance of the Lord's mansion, which would be unreasonable. This banquet, Aslan can be said to have emptied his mind, taking out all the red wine he brought from Kyoto and preparing many delicious desserts, almost exhausting most of the food he brought. But all of this was worth it. As Aslan watched the guests in front of him devour their food, he couldn't help but shake his head. Even the big shots in the town, who lived in such a secluded town all year round, still had poor knowledge. This group of country bumpkins. An untimely voice suddenly sounded next to him. Although the sound was very low, it was still heard by Aslan. The speaker's name is Lancelot, the youngest knight in the Aslan Knight's Guard. He came from a poor background and was not well liked in the knightly community in Kyoto. Especially due to the lack of sufficient resources for cultivation, his growth rate was extremely slow, and his strength remained lukewarm. In addition, he had little combat experience last year. In the Knight's Guard, their strength has always been at the end of the crane. Only Aslan knew how this unremarkable person would grow over time. Lancelot was born to be a ruthless person, and for a long time to come, he will be Aslan's secret sword, specifically cleaning up his unseen affairs and always being Aslan's right-hand man. When Aslan was in trouble, he did not use death to show his determination like Arthur did. Instead, he fled with Aslan's family as soon as possible, leaving some incense for Aslan. Compared to Arthur's foolish loyalty, Aslan appreciates Lancelot's versatility even more. I don't want to hear such words again. Aslan raised the glass in his hand and said calmly. Lancelot, who was forced to follow Aslan, suddenly came to life with his originally unwilling and desperate heart. Lancelot, who rose from the bottom of society, had a much stronger understanding of human nature than veteran knights like Arthur. From Aslan's indifferent tone, he could hear a sense of confidence, a sense of absolute control over the situation. "Wait and follow my orders." Aslan finished speaking and walked towards Ron, holding up his tall glass. Ron, who was eating greasy food, saw Aslan coming over and quickly wiped his hands, wanting to say hello to Aslan. "Kill him." Aslan's cold voice rang in Lancelot's ear, and he was only momentarily stunned before unleashing his fastest speed ever, piercing his sword into Ron's chest. Ron looked at Lancelot's long sword piercing into his chest in shock and fear, unable to even scream for help before being stabbed by Lancelot's sword. Claude, who had been watching Aslan all along, saw this scene and his face changed dramatically. He immediately thought of several possibilities without any hesitation, let alone arguing with Aslan, but prepared to take advantage of the chaos and escape. Unfortunately, he was blocked by Arthur, who had been staring at him all along. Aslan quickly threw a dagger in front of Ron and shouted loudly, "Bold, daring to assassinate my lord." The people who were originally in shock instinctively widened their eyes, but coincidentally accepted this reason. After all, Aslan had not issued any political orders since entering the territory and had always focused on recuperation. It was not until today that he officially appeared in public, and this happened. If it were someone else, they would have doubted it, but when the Ronald brothers did such a thing, everyone took it for granted. For a long time, these brothers have been ambitious and wanted to rule the entire town of Merlot, but they have been boycotted by others. Nevertheless, the two brothers have been using powerful force to suppress the members of the town command faction. Most importantly, these two brothers have a criminal record. They once assassinated a lord, which scared the lord and made him flee the town of Merlot. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Raising the Butcher Knife. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Raising the butcher knife. Before everyone could be pleasantly surprised by Ron's death, a fierce battle erupted in the corner of the banquet. Claude, the strongest in the town of Merlot and holding the intermediate swordsman rank, fought alongside Arthur. Swordsmen and knights are actually similar, mainly cultivating fighting spirit, but their equipment is much worse, mainly leather armor, and they don't know how to ride in battle. On the other hand, knights are the opposite. Even knights like Arthur, who came from Aslan's downfall, have excellent armor and shields on their bodies. Combined with Arthur's peak intermediate strength, he has perfectly suppressed Claude. At this point, Claude is really foolish if he can't understand. This banquet was completely a conspiracy by Aslan, with the aim of eliminating the two brothers. Claude wanted to seek help, but soon found that the remaining knights of the Aslan Knights Guard had already surrounded him. Surrounded by strong enemies, he was ultimately powerless to fall into a pool of blood. Eshan looked at the two people lying in a pool of blood in front of him, feeling a chill in his heart. This new young lord was also too violent. He first dealt with the Claude brothers, who had the most powerful force in the town. Will it be his turn next? Just as this idea was about to emerge, I heard Aslan's gentle voice ringing. "Mayor Eshan, please come to my side." Eshan was immediately awakened, and he also saw Aslan's plan. However, facing the knights armed to the teeth around him, he ultimately lowered his head and respectfully bowed to Aslan. "Follow the Lord's instructions." Aslan smiled happily. Eshan's behavior is exactly the same as that of the previous life. Once the Claude brothers are solved, he will turn to him as soon as possible. He is a shrewd old man. This life is no exception, but compared to previous lives, Aslan's methods this time are more brutal and bloody, but the effect is more obvious. At first, he crossed the river by touching a stone, which took him 3 years. However, every time Aslan remembered it, he couldn't help but laugh and cry. In this foreign world, mastering powerful power is the foundation of his foothold. This is also the extravagance of the nobles of the Cleveland Kingdom, yet they can easily suppress every rebellion that erupts. The reason is simple. Nobles possess high-level power and elite equipment, which can completely defeat the entire civilian world. Aslan gives you 3 days to register all the people in the town, even the children cannot be missed, and the town guard will be fully handed over to my guardian knight Arthur, no problem. Aslan said, holding a tall cup in his hand and smiling, completely in a consultative tone. Aslan's head lowered even lower, and he kept repeating that he had lived to this age. He wouldn't really think that Aslan was speaking to him in a consultative tone, as evidenced by the Lord's decisive killing of the Cloud brothers. "I obey your orders," Aslan quickly responded. The reason why the control of the town guard needs to be approved by Aslan is because the deputy head of the town guard is Aslan's nephew. After receiving the order, Aslan immediately had Willik called home. Aslan's study was closed at the door, and his wife watched cautiously around the house. His nephew Willik exclaimed discontentedly, "Why, with the death of the Claude brothers, the entire militia of the town guard will be under our control. Do we need to be afraid of that lord? Even if we have intermediate knight strength, what if he dares to kill us all?" Eric's words made Aslan frown slightly, but he was speechless. Aslan had also thought about the whole issue, but always felt that something was wrong there, but couldn't figure out what was wrong. At this moment, Willik rushed over from the town guard's confidence in a hurry. "What's going on? Why is Pick running around in a panic?" Standing at the window, vigilant, Willik saw his confidant Pick running towards him with a hint of doubt on his face. "Oh no, something's wrong." Aslan immediately realized that something was wrong there. This lord knows Merlot town very well. As soon as they arrived, they eliminated the largest assassin in Merlot town, the Cloud brothers. They had already reached out to the town guard, and judging from the appearance of Pick running over, it was very likely that this lord had already sent someone to take over the town guard. If it were really like this, Aslan would have to fear the methods and wisdom of this young lord. Swindle Willik out of the town guard station and send someone directly to take over the town guard. Compared to others, Aslan knows very well about the members of the town guard. They are not an army at all, but a group of thugs and thugs. This way, the army has never done anything serious except in the fish and meat village. But it is precisely because of their large number and power that the people who control them become the rulers of Merlot town. "It's not good, Lieutenant Commander." The Lord's knights suddenly broke into the camp, controlling Ali and Peter, and the other brothers were also arrested. "I heard that the Lord is going to judge them," Pike said, panting with fear in his eyes. Willik was instantly furious, and Aslan quickly followed suit. "Lord, we need to judge these local ruffians and thugs from the town guard." When they arrived at the central square of the town, they realized that it was already crowded with people. Although 500 people didn't seem to be many, when they gathered together, it was also a small area of darkness. When Aslan arrived here, he had already seen a large area of blood on the ground, and the surrounding crowd was full of cheers. Especially when he noticed his old friend Wilson standing next to the Lord, the fear in his heart became even more apparent. Only Wilson could quickly summon all the residents of the entire Merlot town, and at the same time, quickly list out the crimes of these thugs and thugs. In the past, Lai'anning's daughter was tarnished by several thugs from the town guard and eventually committed suicide. However, at that time, those thugs were all sheltered by the Claude brothers, so he naturally couldn't move them. Now that the Claude brothers died, Lai'anning, in order to seek revenge, immediately turned to the new lord and began to settle accounts. Will looked at the two heads on the ground with bright red eyes, speechless melancholy. The feeling of seeking revenge and worrying about gains and losses instantly filled his entire body, leaving him somewhat at a loss. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. After getting rid of these malignant tumors, I believe that from now on, our town of Merlot will become even better, don't you think?" Aslan walked up to Wilson and said with a smile. Will instinctively nodded and looked at the red heads of about 10 people on the ground before suddenly waking up. Then he felt a chill in his back. This young lord was truly bloody and cruel. Since his official appearance today, he has killed more than 10 people. And this time, he was completely tied to his chariot, making betrayal impossible. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Development Planning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Development Planning. However, Wilson was puzzled as to why the Lord was so aware of his hatred towards the town guards, and in just a few words, he ignited his flames of revenge. Yes, I will definitely do my best to assist Lord. At this point, Wilson is also very straightforward, and the following are self-proclaimed. Lai'anning is a rare sage and scholar in Merlot town. In his past life, he was also the right-hand man in Aslan's management of Merlot town, but he joined just 2 years earlier. Aslan looked at the crowd in front of him, looking up and shouting loudly. I, Aslan Sarah, hereby make an agreement with all of you that no one shall abide by these 3 laws. The first one shall pay for the murderer's life, the second one shall plead guilty to the injured, and the third one shall also be convicted of theft. After a sentence, the entire square fell silent, and Wilhelm couldn't help but gasp for breath. Someone asked curiously, does that include Lord yourself? Bold. Suddenly, someone in the Knight's Guard was furious and wanted to catch them, but Aslan stopped them. Aslan nodded and raised his hands, saying, of course, even if I kill for no reason, I must pay for my life. Suddenly, the entire square was in an uproar. After listening, the people enthusiastically supported and began to shout loudly. Long live Lord! Aslan had experienced such a thing in his past life, and now the law of the Cleveland Kingdom is completely in the service of the ruling class. Noble killers only need to compensate, and as for noble injuries, there is no need to even compensate, as if everything is natural. It is precisely because of this that Aslan's 3 chapters of the law were able to quickly gain the support of the people of Merlot town. As for the phrase, killing without reason, in the following sentence, it is completely designed to protect his ruling position. As long as the charges are listed before killing, it cannot be considered as killing without reason. As the saying goes, there is no hesitation in wanting to add sin, which is the most favored trick used by rulers. Upon seeing the scene before him, Aslan couldn't help but sigh. He had been operating in the town of Merlot for over a decade, but there was no new lord to say. He voluntarily surrendered with the already frightened and foolish Willick, and it was not too late for him. Moreover, when the lord came to Merlot, there were not many people and he needed the help of these locals to some extent. Looking at the kneeling uncles and nephews, Aslan's lips slightly curled up and the town of Merlot settled down. Aslan personally helped his uncle and nephew up and began arranging new positions. From tonight, Arthur will be in charge of the warden, Willick will be the deputy warden, and Aslan will continue to serve as the town magistrate, responsible for urban and agricultural development. Wilson will serve as the sheriff and treasurer, responsible for the security and economic development of Merlot town. Aslan began to give orders. Everyone respectfully accepted their orders, and as for the issue of power and position, Aslan and Willick did not pay much attention. How big is Merlot town and how many things can be managed? Yes, Lord. The 4 of them spoke in unison. Great, let's talk about the future development plan of the town. Upon hearing the word, development plan, the 4 of them were confused. Only Wilson, who had the most ink in his belly, immediately reacted and looked at Aslan with some excitement, hoping that Aslan could provide favorable suggestions for the town of Merlot. Over the years, he had considered developing the town of Merlot, but it didn't go unnoticed. Not to mention that at that time, a group of thugs like Claude were still in power. Many of his suggestions were just jokes. Upon hearing these words, Aslan couldn't help but take them seriously. In the past few days since entering Merlot town, I have already walked through the entire town. The barren land in Merlot town is our biggest flaw, but it is not the real reason for our food shortage. Only when food is stable can the town develop and the population increase. Therefore, in the future, I hope you will focus on developing food and population. Aslan asked someone to take out a rough map of the town of Merlot and say. This was made by him overnight last night. Although it may seem unsightly, it allows people to see the terrain and environment of the entire Merlot town at a glance. Of course, this must be a native of Merlot town. The alien world traversed by Aslan, although a world of magic and fighting spirit, is still mainly composed of ordinary civilians, who are currently in the medieval civilization of Europe. In this era, people do not have so much pursuit, and the biggest problem they face every day is whether they can eat enough today. Aslan's words made both Wilson and Eshin nod, and their final vigilance gradually relaxed. From this point, it can be seen that this lord has truly considered and planned for the development of the town. I have checked this chaotic area and not all the stones below are mainly soil. They should have rolled down from the side of the rocky mountain, rather than naturally exposed, Aslan said solemnly. Upon hearing Aslan's words, Eshin and Wilson's eyes lit up. The real reason for the food problem in Merlot town was actually the lack of sufficient food production areas. If the bottom of that plain was really soil, it could indeed greatly solve the land problem. Lord, is what you're saying true? Wilson said with some uncertainty. Aslan nodded and then took out a fruit and placed it on the table. Eshin picked it up and carefully examined it before saying somewhat uninteresting, Lord, this is just an ordinary basket fruit. Baoluo fruit is a fruit grown in a jungle 5 or 6 miles away from the town of Merlot. The skin of this fruit is red, and it tastes similar to potatoes. It is a high-starch food and has become the main source of food in Merlot. It is only a wild fruit, and its growth cycle and yield are unstable. Not to mention, other herbivores also eat Baoluo fruit, which sometimes goes slowly. Baoluo fruit is eaten clean by wild animals. I have decided to promote the cultivation of Baoluo fruit, Aslan said decisively. Wilson and Eshin looked shocked, but after being shocked, they supported Aslan. The reason is simple. Even if a piece of land is cleared, even if crops are grown on barren land, the yield cannot be increased. It is better to plant Baoluo fruit, which has strong survival ability and good yield. Then I will mobilize the farmers tomorrow to clean up the farm. Then I'll take someone to Beto Forest tomorrow to transplant the fruit tree from the basket. As for that plain, it is actually one of the largest farmland in Aslan's past life, with tens of thousands of acres of land fully developed, which is enough to meet the food needs of the town of Merlot. However, with such a large area of wasteland, relying on the existing population, they want to fully utilize it. Aslan felt a headache and rubbed her head. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Maisi Village. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Maisi Village. When caught up in heated discussions at the Lord's mansion, Claude's son Neji bribed a security guard and successfully escaped the town. Before leaving, he looked at the small town he had grown up in, with a hint of malice in his eyes. Aslan. You wait, I will come back. The next morning, Aslan received news of Neji's escape. He just nodded and looked calm, completely ignoring Neji. Lord, cut the grass without uprooting the roots. Arthur saw Aslan's still indifferent appearance and thought he was still too young, so he suggested. Aslan smiled and shook his head. What can he do as a half-year-old kid? Upon hearing Aslan's words, Arthur finally let out a sigh. In his eyes, Aslan was still too young. Looking out at the Guluan mountain outside the town, Aslan gave a cold smile. Neji is a native of the town of Merlot. If he wants to escape, even if Arthur makes a move, he may not be able to catch up, let alone have escaped all night. As for whether there will be any unknown danger, Aslan is clear about it. Claude used to be a member of the Armored Gate Bandits, but later retreated to the town of Merlot to guard their treasure trove in the area and provide cover for them, as their stronghold was located on a barren mountain less than 30 kilometers away from Merlot. Because the town of Merlot is located in a remote area, although it is the junction of two continents, it has become a dead end due to the partition of the Rift Peak Grand Canyon. There is only Merlot Town, a poor and impoverished town in the surrounding area, and there is no profit or loss to be made. No one could have imagined that this place would be the famous stronghold of the Armored Gate Bandits. After the development of his past life in the town of Merlot, Claude did not give up his territory as an insider to the Armored Gate Bandits. So Aslan is very familiar with the Armored Gate Bandit, especially the leader of the Armored Gate Bandit, Armor Gate. That was a master who never saw a rabbit and never scattered an eagle. Now that Merlot Town is in dire straits, even if it were looted, it wouldn't be able to grab much money. Moreover, there is a mid-level knight named Arthur sitting in the town. If we accidentally damage a few brothers, wouldn't it be more than worth the loss? So before the town developed, it was still very safe. Prior to this, Aslan only needed to vigorously develop military equipment. Gather the remaining town guard and remove most of the people who are too old or have physical disabilities, leaving 43 people. On the empty space in the backyard of the Lord's mansion, Aslan looked at the group of young people in front of him, and in fact, the youngest people here were all older than him. "Do you want to become a swordsman or even a knight?" Aslan said in a high tone. The youngest militiamen raised their heads one after another, with golden stars in their eyes. The Kingdom of Cleveland is a warrior country, and as long as its strength is strong enough, it can become a noble in the kingdom. For example, after entering the realm of Grand Knights, as long as you register in the royal capital and pledge allegiance to the kingdom, you can obtain a piece of territory and become a great noble lord. This is also why the Kingdom of Cleveland has always been able to ensure its ruling position. Absolute power. Power that civilians cannot possess. As a famous saying goes, soldiers who do not want to become generals are not good soldiers. In a different world, the only way for commoners to learn fighting spirit is to join the military. They come here hard not only to learn fighting spirit, become a great swordsman, but even have the opportunity to become knights. Think. The atmosphere of the militia on the entire open space was stirred up, and Aslan waved his hand to signal everyone to quiet down. From now on, the town guard will be promoted with military honors, and the level of fighting spirit cultivation methods will be given according to the level of merit. Aslan's words instantly brought the atmosphere and momentum of all the militia to the extreme. What is the biggest fear of an employee entering a company? There is no room for promotion and no prospect for the company. Such enterprises, if they only rely on drawing big cakes, will only be abandoned by their employees in the end. Aslan has given these militia hope and opportunities, and they will naturally strive hard. Subsequently, under Arthur's leadership, there began to be meticulous training, a scene that Merlot had never seen before. In the early morning, many residents had just opened their windows when they saw a neatly dressed town guard running in the morning. Their footsteps are very light and their clothes are also very simple, giving people a sense of stability and reliability. Aslan stood in front of the window of the Lord's mansion, watching the town guard slowly disappearing from sight, nodding with satisfaction. That's not enough. Aslan turned his gaze to the animal skins on the table, which he had recorded all the events and things he could in his past life overnight. He is worried that over time, he will forget certain key events. The town of Merlot has already taken control, and the wasteland is also beginning to enter a state of development. Population is an unavoidable fact for Merlot. Next, he began to turn his gaze to the villages around the town of Merlot. That's right, it's the surrounding villages. Although Merlot Town is located in a remote area with scarce resources, it has an advantage that other prosperous areas do not have, which is the absence of nobility. Without nobility, it means there is no exploitation, no war, and no persecution. This has become a paradise for many refugees. Although life has been a bit tough, it has added a sense of tranquility compared to other big cities in the kingdom. In his past life, Aslan unified all the villages around the town of Merlot, adding tens of thousands of people to the town, which was absolutely unimaginable at that time. The population hidden in many villages far exceeds everyone's expectations. At noon, the scorching sun shines in the sky. After completing his daily tasks, Aslan began to visit a village less than 30 miles away from the town of Merlot. Although it was a village, its scale was no less than that of Merlot. Maisi village, it is said that the first village chief was named Maisi, and he established this village with refugees who had fled from nearly 100. It has a history of more than 30 years now. Nowadays, it is one of the most powerful villages around the town of Merlot. Compared to Merlot, the only difference is that they are not included in the kingdom's records and cannot accept the trafficking of local merchants and resources. Although self-sufficient, many times it is necessary to go to Merlot town to buy things. In the middle of each month, it is the busiest time in Merlot town, and all the surrounding villages go there to go to the market, and even many bandit groups go there to sell stolen goods. Aslan brought Arthur and his group to the front of May's village. The high wooden walls of the fortress made Aslan shake his head. At this point, the town of Merlot was far behind, with the only advantage being its orthodox identity, which was even inferior to other villages. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Lai'anning Village. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Lai'anning Village. A creaking sound. The wooden gate of Maisi village slowly opened, and a fully armed militia team walked out. Behind them was an old man holding crutches, with white hair and a slightly hunched body. However, those bright and lively eyes made people dare not underestimate this old man. Aslan was also very aware of the abilities of this old man. He had been in contact with him in his past life, and his name was Johnson. He was also a well-known figure in the town of Merlot, which is hundreds of miles away. He made great contributions to the development of the village of Maisi to its current scale. Johnson also has another identity, which is a great magician. Although he is only an intermediate level, for a remote and impoverished place like the Merlot region, even a high-level swordsman needs to consider it. Of course, only a few people in Maisi village are aware of this identity. Aslan knew because during a conflict in his past life, he led a large army to suppress the situation, forcing Johnson to take action. I don't know if the Lord has arrived, but it's a mistake to welcome him from afar. Johnson naturally knew who the young man in front of him was. Just a few days after the new Lord arrived at Merlot town, he dealt with the former Earth tyrant Claude and his family, punished the entire town guard, and made the entire Merlot town look new and prosperous. Johnson village chief, it's better to be famous than to meet. Meeting is better than being famous. Aslan also smiled and said hello. His previous life experience had made him look the same when Mount Taishan had collapsed. Johnson had no intention of inviting Aslan into the village, but instead stood in front of the village gate and asked with a calm expression, "I don't know what the Lord is doing to come to the village of Maisi." Aslan didn't pay much attention, he was well aware of the attitude of the surrounding villages towards Merlot town. They are unwilling to recognize the status of Merlot town because once recognized, they must pay taxes and obey the transfer of Merlot town. Then they will lose the days of freedom they have today. Aslan only left after a few polite words, without mentioning any official matters from beginning to end, looking like a younger generation visiting a senior. Johnson looked at Aslan's distant figure with great confusion. What is this young lord really thinking? At first, he thought Aslan was trying to persuade Max village to join the town of Merlot or form an alliance with Max village, but from beginning to end, Aslan didn't put up a word about these two topics. This made Johnson, who claimed to be cunning and calculating, very frustrated. Aslan's reason for doing this is simple. Johnson is naturally suspicious, and he only needs to make Johnson suspicious, which can buy valuable time for his next actions. His true goal is Lai'anning village. Lai'anning village is a village native to the town of Merlot, or rather a tribe. It is a barbarian clan tribe with a small population of only 100 people, but its combat power is among the top 3 in the entire Merlot area. The village chief is a senior swordsman, wielding a huge bone hammer that is invincible, and no one dares to compete with him, earning him the title of the top expert in the Merlot region. With Aslan's current strength, he naturally dare not imagine being able to win over the other party. He just wants to establish a good relationship with Lai'anning village. The biggest problem in Lai'anning village is food shortage. Although there are only about 100 people, the barbarians are famous for their large appetite and do not engage in agriculture. Although they are all the best hunters, hunting depends on luck. Sometimes, even if they go out for a whole day, they may not be able to catch prey. Most of the time, they are full and hungry. As soon as Aslan and his team arrived at the entrance of Lai'anning village, more than a dozen barbarian warriors surrounded them, which immediately made Arthur's nerves tense. Because among the barbarian warriors surrounding them, there are two intermediate swordsmen. The weapons in hand are mainly bone sticks and stone spears, but in front of that strong physique, even a wooden stick can unleash terrifying power. Is that how you greet your friends? Aslan waved his hand and asked Arthur and the others to pull out their swords and insert them back, speaking calmly. The barbarian warrior led by him was surprised to see Aslan so calm, and then smiled foolishly, waving his hand to let the others retreat. Our clan leader has been waiting for you for a long time. Aslan nodded and led the barbarian warrior into the village. The reason why they say this is not because their clan leader is so resourceful, but the real reason is because they possess powerful military force. Every month, each village has to pay a protection fee, otherwise it is difficult to guarantee that these starving barbarian soldiers will come into the village to snatch food on that day. They also treat Aslan as someone who pays protection fees. After all, in the previous town of Merlot, Claude would personally deliver a batch of food every month. Although the food was not abundant, it also represented an attitude. Even the nominal leader of the Merlot region has to pay protection fees, and other villages need to weigh their options before refusing. Entering the village, Aslan couldn't even look directly at the barbarian architecture. That cannot be called a building at all, it should be called a tent. Even many tents are leaking air. If it weren't for the strong physique of barbarians, in this environment, there would be no problem of dying from illness. The new lord, I don't know how much food you plan to provide every month. Clan leader Lai'anning watched as Aslan came over, sitting on the ground with a large golden sword. His huge figure was only slightly shorter than Aslan standing. Aslan initially estimated that Lai'anning was at least 2.5 meters tall, with a large bone stick beside him covered in iron knots. It was estimated that a single stick could smash a person into flesh and mud. No, you misunderstood. I came here to make a deal with you, Aslan said with a smile. Lai'anning's face instantly turned cold, her eyes wide open and staring at Aslan, with a high possibility of making a move at a word of disagreement. Do you want to take action? I hope you can consider carefully. I am from the Serra family in Kyoto, and there are not even 1 or 2 mages behind my family. As for the Grand Knights, there are dozens of them. If they move me, I can guarantee that within 3 days, the entire village of Lai'anning will turn into ruins. None of the warriors here can survive, and the strength of our human army is not just about numbers. Aslan sat in front of Lai'anning without any concern, instead of looking directly at him. Lai'anning's eyes slowly turned red and he stared at Aslan, making Arthur behind him look straight and furry. But the next moment, Lai'anning laughed heartily. Just joking with Lord, I don't know what Lord wants to trade with us. You should be very aware of the situation in our Lai'anning village, we are both poor and worthless. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Natural Spells. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Natural Spells. Lai'anning is not an old fogey of Johnson, who doesn't understand the twists and turns between nobles. They are still in the ruling stage of the clan, only knowing that their people are in trouble and must give their all to help. With this mindset, he will naturally be frightened by the family power behind Aslan when thinking about the Aslan family. As long as one comes from a serious human background, one can guess that Aslan was assigned to this remote and impoverished land due to the failure of family struggles. Only in the barbarian world can Aslan dare to display the family's emblem boldly. I have opened up a wasteland to grow food, and there will be a harvest in a while. I hope to exchange the food with your village for meat, and the price can be negotiated, Aslan said with a slight squint in his eyes. This is a habit he has preserved in his past life, and once his eyes are narrowed, it proves that he wants to deceive others. Grain. Lai'anning suddenly fell silent. When it comes to the source of meat, the entire Merlot area is not as stable as their Lai'anning village, but simply eating meat cannot satisfy their stomachs. If they can exchange a large amount of food and pair it with some meat, it can actually make them easily satisfied. We need a large amount of food, Lai'anning said, staring into his eyes. Aslan nodded, knowing very well the appetite of the barbarians. In his past life, Aslan used this method to slowly subdue these barbarians and make them the strongest vanguard of the Merlot Legion. But I need time, my food has just begun to be planted and I need time. No problem, it's the same for us anyway, said Lai'anning very generously. He is well aware of the difficulty in growing food, especially in the Merlot region. If Aslan can really succeed in planting, it would be good news for them. If it's a wild beast like a pig, the price of living is higher than dead, Aslan emphasized. Piggy beasts are a type of wild animal similar to mountain pigs. They have a characteristic of fast growth and are omnivorous, making them easy to breed. In their past lives, they were the main source of meat for Aslan, and due to large-scale breeding, they eventually became the largest pig farmer in the Cleveland Kingdom. Okay. Lai'anning personally escorted Aslan away from the village. Before leaving, Aslan, out of curiosity, made a request to Lai'anning to touch his bone stick. Lai'anning was also very generous, even with a hint of cunning in his eyes, and handed the bone stick to Aslan's hand. As a result, Aslan couldn't hold it steady and almost fell to the ground under the pressure of a bone stick. Lai'anning quickly retrieved the bone stick, but saw Aslan sitting on the ground alone, staring blankly at the sky. Lord, Aslan's situation startled Arthur greatly. Quickly helping him up and wanting to check Aslan's condition, Aslan slowly regained consciousness, shook his head at Arthur, and then said goodbye and left. Along the way, Aslan did not speak, but his eyes occasionally became hollow. Arthur and other members of the knights and guards were all worried. Aslan's eyes were shining brightly, and his mind was constantly filled with thoughts about the shape and construction model of the bone stick, especially the 3D model, which was similar to a magical model. Aslan was shocked and remembered seeing a book on innate magic in his past life. Divine magic talent, only magicians can awaken their talent, and tens of thousands of magicians will not have anyone awaken their divine magic talent. The most impressive divine talent among them was the divine artifact. The reason why it is named after divine magic is because it cannot be explained by magic. Divine artifacts can be produced by awakening the host's talent and relying on materials of the same level. In the Sina continent, it can only be described as divine magic, but in Aslan's eyes, it is similar to a 3D printer. As long as you have the complete shape of an object in your mind, you can rely on spiritual power and materials to create it, which is similar to the alchemy of magic, but with a higher success rate and faster speed. Is it really? Aslan shouted to Arthur next to him without even thinking. Arthur, lend me your sword. Although Arthur was puzzled, he still respectfully handed his sword to Aslan. Aslan took Arthur's sword, and under his control, his spiritual power began to cover the long sword, completely replicating its shape in his mind, while also revealing many symbols of magical elements. Magic elements are similar to chemical elements in previous lives. Magic elements, also known as chemical elements, refer to over 100 basic metallic and non-metallic substances in nature, which are composed of only one atom. Each nucleus in the atom has the same number of protons, which cannot be decomposed by ordinary chemical methods and can form all substances. If it were just an ordinary junior magician, it would be difficult to recognize all these magical elements, but Aslan is different. In his previous life, He was a knowledgeable magician, and coupled with his familiarity with the periodic table of elements, he had already memorized the cycles of magical elements. With just a little calculation, you can spell out the materials above. Aslan returned to the town of Merlot and immediately took out a piece of paper to calculate the required materials, and then he locked them all in his room. When Aslan came out of the room again, he added a cavalry cross sword that was exactly the same as Arthur's, but this cross sword was more brand new and gorgeous than Arthur's. As long as the spiritual and magical powers are strong enough, magical artifacts can even simulate artifacts. Last night, Aslan attempted to manufacture new weapons and armor. Unfortunately, too many resources need to be expended, which is simply beyond the current capacity of Aslan. Divine artifacts are only responsible for manufacturing items, without considering craftsmanship and technology. Aslan only needs to calculate the required materials. This requirement may sound simple, but for the impoverished town of Merlot, it is undoubtedly a nightmare-level dungeon. The council hall of the Lord's mansion was originally a cluttered office desk, but Aslan had someone clean it up, leaving only a large round table with a diameter of 5 meters. Aslan sat on the main seat, which was different from other positions by raising a step, symbolizing nobility. Aslan listened to Eshen's report but hesitated to speak. The reason is simple. Wood Village, 50 miles away from Merlot town, actually requires Merlot town to pay 50 pounds of salt every month. Salt is the largest economic income of Merlot town every month, and almost everyone in the Merlot area comes to Merlot town to buy salt. The amount of salt that Merlot town can buy from the Acropolis every month is only 100 pounds, and Wood Village starts with 50 pounds. Not only does the lion speak up, but it is completely challenging Merlot town's dominant position in the Merlot area. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Merlot people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Merlot people. Listening to Eshen's report, Aslan's eyes narrowed slightly, with an inexplicable gleam in them. This Wood Village was the first village in a previous life to go to war with Merlot town. Their population was similar to that of Maisi village, but they trained 6 intermediate swordsmen, including 1 apprentice magician. This is also their arrogant reason, even wanting to replace the town of Merlot and become orthodox. Aslan sat in the main seat, holding his chin in his right hand and tapping on the armrest of the chair with his left hand. It took him a while before he spoke up and said, "Mayor Eshen, tell me your opinion." Eshen couldn't answer Aslan's question for a moment, saying no or no, and Merlot was unable to resist the attack from Wood Village. Well, it still needs to be considered in the long run. Eshen pondered for a long time before giving such an answer. It seems that the mayor of Eshen still doesn't want to believe me. Aslan stood up expressionlessly. After listening, Eshen's face turned pale, but after opening his mouth, he still didn't make a sound. It is obvious that the people of Merlot town still do not believe that Aslan has the ability to confront Wood Village, as their strength is too strong. Eshen has never wanted to admit that the reason why Merlot town can still maintain its integrity and independence is due to the timely monthly offerings sent by the Claude brothers. Eshen really wanted to persuade Aslan to agree to Wood Village, but there was no need to give him 50 pounds, he could definitely negotiate. But if I had to say anything, I immediately swallowed Aslan's eagle-like gaze. He doesn't think Lord is such a talkative person. When everyone dispersed, Aslan still sat firmly on the main seat, and Will Xin slowly packed his things until there was only him and Aslan left in the council hall before walking to Aslan's face. "Lord, do you have a way to handle this matter?" "Oh." Aslan immediately showed an enthusiastic attitude. In the previous life, this matter was also Wilson's idea to Aslan, and so was this life. But in the previous life, about half a year after he came to Merlot town, Claude deliberately embarrassed him and encouraged Wood Village to find Aslan's trouble. In this life, because there was no reconciliation between Claude and Aslan, the ambition of Wood Village expanded rapidly. Aslan was well aware that Claude was able to persuade Wood Village only by leveraging the power of the armored gate bandit. We can join forces with Lai'anning village. Lai'anning has been eyeing Wood village for a long time, Wilson said, and respectfully bowed before leaving. Aslan smiled mysteriously, and as night fell, he secretly brought Arthur directly to the village of Lai'anning. He said very bluntly, I need help. 20 pounds of salt per month is enough to meet the needs of your village. Lai'anning stared at Aslan for a long time, and he had more or less received news that the guys in Wood village were indeed a bit excessive. The cost is not enough, Lai'anning shook his head and said. Enough, gaining my friendship is your greatest benefit. Believe me, in less than a year, I will be able to create a brand new town of Merlot. No. It should be called Merlot City, and you will understand how wise your actions are now, Aslan said firmly. Looking at Aslan's serious and determined gaze, Lai'anning suddenly had an illusion of wanting to believe him. You're just so confident. Aslan nodded and said, I was born for this place. As long as you help me now, in the future, you barbarians will no longer be foreigners, but members of my city of Merlot, a powerful Merlot army. Lai'anning looked at Aslan in a daze. This pancake is painted a bit large, anyway. Their barbarian tribe has been rooted in the Merlot area for decades and has never heard of such an unrealistic dream. Do you know what you're talking about? Although the overall intelligence of barbarians is slightly lower than that of humans, it doesn't mean they are mentally disabled, especially for barbarians like Lai'anning who have reached the level of advanced swordsmen. Their intelligence is no different from ordinary people. Aren't you willing to spend your whole life here, and don't you want the glory of the barbarians to be restored? Aslan became more and more excited as he spoke. In fact, this is Aslan's understanding of Lai'anning in his past life. On the surface, he had no interest in anything else except for ensuring that everyone in the tribe could eat outside. In fact, Lai'anning was determined to get rid of this situation because he was well aware that once there was a unified force in the Merlot region, they, as foreigners, would be the first to suffer from cleansing. But in the situation of the barbarian king, who has a big stomach, and no village can afford to support them, coupled with their foreign identity, they are easily targeted by alliances, so they have always had to take a neutral stance. Aslan is an opportunity for Lai'anning, an opportunity to break the current balance. What can you give me? Lai'anning put the bone stick in his hand next to Aslan and asked. The attitude is very obvious. If the answer cannot satisfy him, Aslan will definitely not be able to leave here alive today. Seeing this familiar scene, Aslan smiled happily. I can allow your tribe to join the city of Merlot and become citizens of Merlot, as long as you do not betray and enjoy civic treatment for generations. Aslan said this, and Lai'anning had already placed his hand on the bone stick. Aslan was completely unafraid of this and continued, I want to establish a society that is free from racial discrimination, whether it be barbarians, half-humans, or even orcs, where they only have one name for Merlot. Lai'anning's hand unconsciously moved to the side, his mouth opened in an O shape, and he looked at the young man in front of him incredulously. His ideals are simply too great, so great that he finds them unbelievable. Nowadays, the entire continent is revered by the human race. Although the strength of other alien races cannot be underestimated, more than 70% of the land on the vast continent is occupied by humans. In many powerful empires, alien races are actually synonymous with slaves. Lai'anning had to admit that although Aslan's painting of the pancake was ethereal, he still wanted to believe it. Simply put, let's rely on the small town of Merlot, which has a population of less than 500 today. Although Lai'anning was tempted, he still did not believe it, let alone overwhelming Aslan's entire tribe. It's not possible now, but what about the entire Merlot region? Or maybe the entire Cleveland kingdom, Aslan said with a smile as he stood up. Lai'anning was somewhat surprised by Aslan's ambition, and after a long time he spoke up, what do I need to do? Don't misunderstand, I just want to see your determination and ability. Aslan smiled heartily, pressing his hands on the table and staring into Lai'anning's eyes, saying, come with me to attack Wood Village at night. After success, all the food in Wood Village will belong to you, and the land and population will belong to me. As for the investigation of other forces, I, the small town of Merlot, will take responsibility for it. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Jianghu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Jianghu Lai'anning was really stimulated by Aslan's determination. A night raid on a village is still one of the top 10 villages in the Merlot area in terms of strength. Even if they are a barbarian tribe, they are not fully confident that they can eat Wood Village. Even if they can eat it, they will lose a lot of manpower. Time, location. After whispering a few words in Lai'anning's ear, Aslan took the initiative to leave. Halfway through, Arthur asked anxiously, "Lord, what if the barbarians betray us?" Aslan's mouth slightly curled up and he spoke softly. Arthur's face instantly changed, and his gaze towards Aslan was filled with awe. He never expected that this middle-aged Lord Young Master would have such a cunning plan. Why did Aslan firmly believe that Lai'anning would not betray him? The reason was simple. Someone had to believe him when he spoke out. At that time, Aslan could even retaliate, saying that Lai'anning wanted to disrupt the stability of the Merlot area, cause disputes, and perhaps be jointly attacked by the people of the entire Merlot area. With the current strength of Merlot town, it is impossible to attack Wood Village at night, but Aslan is still very confident. Wherever there are people, there are rivers and lakes, just like in the desolate town of Merlot where there are internal conflicts, let alone in Wood Village. Wood Village is divided into two major forces, with village chief Gulen having the strongest influence, followed by clan elder Good. When Goodall competed with Gulen for the position of village chief, he was assassinated by Gulen. Although he ultimately escaped, his only son died as a result. This matter was done very discreetly by Gulen, who struggled with no evidence and was unable to gain the support of the villagers. In the end, he could only bury the seeds of hatred deeply. Over the years, Good has been working hard and only barely qualified to fight against the Quran, but he still needs some revenge. Aslan was naturally aware of the events in Wood Village. In the past, there was an internal conflict in Wood Village, and in the end, his morale was greatly damaged. Good was defeated and fled to Aslan. It was precisely because Good brought with him the cultivation technology of fruit baskets that the food problem in Merlot town was completely solved. Although Aslan knows how to plant bagels, after all, he is not a professional. He only knows a rough idea. If he could bring Good in, it would be even more perfect. Unfortunately, Good couldn't believe Aslan and refused his meeting request. Aslan didn't care about it either. He was well aware of Good's character and would never let go of any opportunity. "Arthur, arrange for a shrewd guy to hand this letter over to Good." Arthur nodded and finally handed the letter to Lancelot, who was in charge. Recently, Lancelot's performance has been steady with a touch of smoothness, and he is not as rigid as most knights, which has made Arthur very satisfied, and he has started to focus on training. 3 days later, in the village of Wood, Good held a letter tightly in his hand. The letter was made of linen, with the Lord's emblem and autograph on it, but he hesitated to make a decision. But even if he gives up like this, he is not willing to accept it. Less than half an hour away from the night raid, Good crossed back and forth in the room, pondering all possibilities. The Gulen family in Wood Village. Gulen just drank a little inferior malt wine, his face flushed, but his consciousness and thinking were exceptionally clear and sharp. These days, Good has been a bit honest and excessive. Merlot town is still arguing with him to reduce the amount of salt, obviously realizing that their strength is not as good as the compromise made by Wood Village, which makes Gulen very satisfied. If we could also subdue the people of the Good faction, wouldn't it be up to him to decide the future of the Merlot region? As for both Maisi village and Lai'anning village, he consciously ignored them because they have always maintained absolute neutrality. As long as enough food is provided, I believe the two villages will definitely sit idly by. The Quran considered this very carefully, but unfortunately he miscalculated one thing. They could accept the neutrality of the benefits he offered, and naturally could also accept Aslan's interests taking action against them. At the end of the day, they all have the advantage of playing at home. They thought Aslan was new and hadn't been able to connect with other villages so quickly, so they dared to make such a bold threat. If it were another year and a half, Quran would definitely visit the two villages in advance and let them sit on the sidelines, rather than giving them sweet treats after calculating. Recently, Good has been too quiet. Is there any conspiracy? Gulen looked at his son and couldn't help but ask. Kriri is the youngest son of Quran, with average fighting spirit and only barely entering the realm of swordsman apprenticeship. However, he is the brain of the entire Wood village, and many of Quran's conspiracies and schemes come from this young son. There must be. I've been keeping an eye on Good's people these past few days, and I'm very worried that he might ally with the people of Merlot, said Carrie after thinking for a moment. After listening, Gulen immediately burst out laughing. Merlot town now only has 1 intermediate knight, 7 junior knights, and 3 junior swordsmen. Even if we join forces with Good, can such combat power threaten us? After thinking for a moment, Krylai said, it's better to be careful. Quran is well aware of his youngest son's caution, and he also needs this caution to help him. Outside Wood village, Aslan and Lai'anning met in the pitch-black night. The two only nodded and did not speak, so they approached Wood village. The walls of Wood village are not as high as those of Maisi village, but they have many gaps that allow people to see inside, but also make it convenient for those inside to poke out their long guns. There is a torch on the walls of the fortress at regular intervals, but in the darkness, it is still difficult to take care of the entire fortress. Aslan began counting silently, and for the past few days he has been letting Lancelot lurk here, watching the frequency of patrols and guards in Wood village. Almost there, Aslan said softly. Lai'anning nodded, holding the bone stick in his hand and lifting it high with both hands, leaped forward and used the power in mid-air to bang it against the wall of the fortress. The wooden pillar, which was as thick as a bucket of water, was smashed and broken by Lai'anning's stick, causing a loud noise that alarmed the entire Wood village. Good, who was still in a daze, almost couldn't hold the water cup in his hand and spilled water all over the ground. The warning bell in Wood village sounded, and young people from every household ran out with weapons. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Good's cousin, Good rushed in with a two-handed sword. Big brother, the enemy is attacking. I understand. Goodall nodded to indicate that he knew, then sat quietly in his chair, looking at the messy doorstep, wondering if Goodall was puzzled when he saw Goodall like this. Big brother. Good raised his head, a fierce light flashing in his eyes, and asked, do we still have a chance to seek revenge? Upon hearing this, Good immediately fell silent and shook his head for a long time before saying, difficult. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Internal Response. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Internal Response. Wood village now has 5 intermediate professions, of which Good and Good are 2, and the remaining 3 are all from Gulen. The most crucial thing is that Gulen's eldest son Chris has also surpassed the intermediate swordsman and become the youngest intermediate professional in the history of Wood village. There are even rumors in the village that Chris may have the opportunity to challenge the advanced swordsman in his lifetime. Once Chris breaks through the advanced swordsman, let alone seek revenge, he is considered lucky not to be held accountable in the autumn. Then we can only do it. Good took out his one-handed sword and strode out of the room with a shield in one hand. Butte was stunned, as if he had realized something. He followed closely behind. Waiting outside was the full power of the 2 brothers in Wood village. 6 junior swordsmen, 15 swordsman apprentices, and more than 20 strong young men. In the past few days, Lancelot had already searched the entire Wood village in disarray. As soon as they entered the door, Aslan and Lai'anning led a large number of people to kill the location of the Quran family. The 2 sides soon met, and Quran was very surprised to see Aslan as the leader. Although he had not seen Aslan before, he also heard many rumors during this period. This new lord is only a young man, and by looking around at a group of fully armed knights guarding him, one can basically determine his identity. Just seeing the wizard robe on Aslan's body made him momentarily amazed and uncertain. He never expected that the town of Merlot, which had been arguing with them for the past few days, would dare to take the lead in killing them. But soon his face changed from surprise to fear, because he saw a figure he didn't like to see the most. Barbarian warrior Lai'anning. What do you want, Lai'anning? Aren't you afraid of being surrounded by the human race in the entire Merlot area? Shouted the Quran with a hint of trembling in his tone. Lai'anning shrugged nonchalantly. Aslan beside him smiled and replied, I don't even know what you're talking about. This action is completely led by our Lord, and Lord Lai'anning is just coming to assist. Upon hearing Aslan's words, Quran almost vomited blood in anger. Just as a support, 1 senior swordsman, 10 intermediate swordsmen, and more than 30 junior swordsmen were dispatched. In addition to the town guard of Merlot, Aslan has deployed over 100 people this time. The barbarian warriors brought by Lai'anning alone are not something they can resist, let alone the Merlot people who came from behind to cover up. Aslan was dressed in a wizard's robe, holding a primary staff and an enchantment ring, which sealed a primary fireball spell that could only be used once every 3 days. This was all that Aslan had brought when he left the Serra family. Aslan strolled in the middle of the line, with Lancelot guarding beside him. Arthur led the town guard to cover up for the barbarian warriors. Quran fought and retreated with his people, not because he didn't want to be tough, but because he couldn't fight at all. The strength of barbarian warriors is inexplicable in the Merlot region. A single village is simply powerless to resist. When Gulen retreated to the center of the village, Good rushed over with his people. Great, Goodall. We rely on the village center to stop them. I have already issued a distress signal, and reinforcements will be coming soon. As soon as Gulen finished speaking, Good stabbed him with a sword. If it weren't for his son Chris's quick reaction, this sword would definitely have given him a chilling blow. Are you crazy? Gulen couldn't help but be taken aback when he saw Good's behavior, and then cursed loudly. Don't you know there's an invasion from foreign enemies? At this time, there is still sibling rivalry. You're asking me crazy. If I don't seek revenge for killing my son, then I'm really crazy. Good launched a frantic attack on Gulen, but Chris wanted to help but was stopped by Good. The Gulen warriors, who were originally able to fight and retreat, completely collapsed when the intermediate swordsman in charge of commanding their battle was beaten to pieces by Lai'anning. The large-scale evacuation began, but the back road was blocked by Good and others. Aslan walked at the front of the team, while Gulen was surrounded by the remaining manpower, and he did not touch from beginning to end. Mr. Good, you did a great job. According to the agreement, you will be the next village chief of Wood Village. Upon hearing Aslan's words, Gulen, who was already scarred, looked up and smiled long. He should have guessed that such a thing would happen long ago. But all along, for the stability of Wood Village, Gulen did not touch Good, but he did not expect this day to happen so quickly. Goodall walked out expressionlessly, his sword still dripping with blood, slowly dripping down the blade. Thank you. Lord Aslan, I will handle the next matter. Aslan nodded nonchalantly and looked at Lai'anning beside him. Lai'anning also nodded. During the attack, he had already arranged for people to plunder all the food in Wood Village, and his goal had been achieved. Retreat. Tomorrow I hope to see you at the Lord's mansion, Aslan said lightly before turning and leaving. Quran looked at Aslan who had gone far away and laughed even more happily, but tears kept flowing down his face. His people are all finished, and there are less than 10 people still alive by his side, including his son, each with injuries and unable to fight anymore. When Aslan's figure completely disappeared from Good sight, his eyes were filled with a bloodthirsty expression, and he went crazy and rushed towards the father and son of Quran, charging with him, as well as the villagers like Gyut who followed him. A massacre of red fruits, without mercy or begging for mercy. When Aslan returned to the Lord's mansion, the sky was white with fish bellies, and Eshan and Wilson had been waiting for a long time. When they saw the town guard returning intact, they looked at each other and breathed a sigh of relief. Winning. Eshan responded with some uncertainty. Aslan nodded, and immediately a maid came over to prepare some facial wash. After a brief grooming, Aslan sat on the main seat, holding his chin with one hand. If you have any suggestions after this victory, let's hear them. Eshan did not hesitate this time and said decisively, integrate all forces and unify the entire Merlot region. Wilson also nodded solemnly. This battle showed them Aslan's wildness and tactics. Unconsciously, he pulled the chariot of Lai'anning village. Finally, I spoke in human language, Aslan said with a rare smile. Report to Lord. Good in Wood Village, please see me. Got it. Eshan and Wilson immediately stood respectfully on both sides, while Aslan also tidied up his clothes and stood ready. Not long after, Good came in with bloodshot eyes, his hair messy, his eyes bloodshot, and he was in a state of confusion and decadence. Revenge must be avenged. The whole person seemed to be hollowed out. My subordinate Good, see Lord. Good saw Aslan and immediately knelt down on one knee to salute. End of this chapter.